YouTube viewers and random Robot Wars fans, Robot Wars Episode 3 just aired, so let's talk about that. First of all, before I start, I want to explain what a removable link is because it played a large part in last night's episode. Basically, what a removable link is a little link between the batteries and the motors of a robot, and this can be pulled out to make it safe in the pits. Unfortunately, when it's pulled out in the arena, that makes it safe in the arena, which isn't a good thing for any fighting robot. In the first round, I didn't have much hope for Overdozer, but in all fairness, they were built in a very small amount of time, so credit where it's due. But making a robot out of wood, never a good thing. King Bee Remix managed to get a hit in on them, but then afterward, King Bee Remix kind of stayed out of the fray. But one robot that was exceptionally impressive was Dan Tom Kia. Absolutely obliterating Glitter Bomb, getting some good flips on them, but they got some amazing flips in on Overdozer, and even managed to flip off the top armor at one point. It was a great opening battle. Glitter Bomb kind of reminds me of the classic series robot Edgehog, which didn't really do very well in the classic series. They got knocked out in the first round each time. They didn't do too badly in the New Blood Championships in Extreme 2, but apart from that, not exactly a great robot. And of course, Edgehog was bought by the same team that made Glitter Bomb, and in fact, the weapon system used on Glitter Bomb came from the original Edgehog. So Edgehog not really having much success, I didn't really have much high hopes for Glitter Bomb, and they were knocked out. So moving on to round 2, and I was very disappointed with Orty. Orty, some of you may not know, was built by the same guy who made Bigger Brother. That's right, a robot so powerful in the 5th Wars, they reached the grand final, and at one stage were absolutely trashed by Hypnodisc, smashed to bits, yet they still managed to fight back against the awesome menacing power of the disc, and push them in the pit, and win. It was one of the most shocking victories in Robot Wars, and to see Ian Watts come back with Orty, and for it to get knocked once by Supernova and have the removable link fly out, was very, very underwhelming. That was such a shame. Supernova and Big Nipper caused a lot of sparks whenever they smashed into each other. That was fun to see. And there was a great jaw-dropping moment where Supernova kind of overbalanced and were kind of tipping on their side. And then on top of that, Big Nipper almost drove into the pit. That was fantastic. But then TR2 managed to tip Supernova onto its side again. It lost control and then ended up down the pit. Supernova also comes from a team of well-established Roboteers. They fought with Oblivion in the 2nd Wars up to the 4th Wars, didn't really do much, was very ineffective. Then the 5th Wars they brought out Supernova. And Supernova have always had a kind of a mixed bag when it comes to their track record. In the 5th Wars they did some great damage to Behemoth before unfortunately they skidded into the CPZ and Matilda with a flywheel knocked the top of the robot off, completely destroying it. In the 6th Wars they did much better. A lot of damage caused by them. They reached the heat final before losing to Spawn again. In the 7th Wars, much like this week's episode, they got knocked out in the first round, but they did manage to do exceptionally well in the World Championships, going all the way to the grand final, only to be knocked out by Storm 2, which is no mean feat. Moving on to the 2nd round, we had Dan Tom Kia versus King Bee Remix. Now, they fought before in the 7th Wars first round. They didn't really interact with each other too much before Dan Tom Kia got a couple of flips in on them, but they also fought each other in the 7th Wars All-Stars tournament, where Dan Tom Kia easily flipped them over and out. And roughly the same thing happened in this week's episode, where Dan Tom Kia were on top throughout the entire battle, flipping King Bee around and managed to get them over and almost out, but they kind of tucked themselves in behind the pit release tower before Matilda came in, using her pneumatic tusks to flip King Bee straight out. TR2 versus Big Nipper. Big Nipper fought in the classic series of Robot Wars. They first entered in the 5th Wars, being easily knocked out by Razor in the first round. They returned in the 7th Wars with a design similar to what we saw in this week's episode, much smaller, much more compact, and they did quite well. They reached the heat final where they were unfortunately knocked out by Grim Reaper. The future of robotic combat seems to be interchangeable weapons, and I like that Big Nipper now has that alternate spinning disc, which I really think they should have used in this fight. The jaws seem to be far too small, so they wouldn't be able to get TR2 into any sort of real danger with those claws, get the grip into them. That didn't seem like it was going to happen, which it didn't. TR2 absolutely dominated the fight. They got Big Nipper into the clutches of dead metal, a place no robot wants to be, and then after almost falling into the pit in the first round, Big Nipper does the same thing again here, teeters on the edge, TR2 comes along, and just a little tiny nudge, and Big Nipper were in the pit. Dan Kia versus TR2. If there's one thing I love seeing, it's two flippers going against each other, because you get a really entertaining battle, and I love seeing them just chuck each other around the arena. It's fantastic. TR2 were definitely on top in this battle. They were flipping Dan Kia all around. Dan Kia didn't really have a chance to get that flipper underneath, and I don't think their weapon was very effective in this fight, because when they did flip, it wasn't to their full potential. TR2 took advantage of that, flipped them around, until eventually something came loose inside and Dan Kia stopped moving. King B Remix versus Big Nipper. It was a great early tactic by King B to release the pit immediately, as Big Nipper seemed to have some sort of obsession with driving down it. Unfortunately for them, that didn't happen this time around. Big Nipper were able to control the fight after getting stuck on the arena spikes. They used that disc to great effect on King B. King B, with those exposed wheels, very susceptible to spinning discs. But here the wheels weren't really an issue, more as the internal electronics, as Big Nipper were just smashing against them, flipped them up in the air a couple of times with the speed and power of that disc. And Big Nipper managed to knock out that removable link in King B, immobilizing the robot, proving that once and for all, the spinning disc on Big Nipper is far more powerful and more effective than the claws. King B Remix versus TR2. King B Remix, as well as having those exposed wheels, also has a very high ground clearance, which means they're very susceptible to flippers. Of course, they are invertible, they can work both ways up, but whenever the robot's flipped, it can dislodge some components on the internals of the robot, which happened here. TR2 flipped them around until the kill switch was damaged and King B were left for dead. King B have been in Robot Wars for a long time, fighting since the Second Wars, and they've never really changed the design of their robot, which I think has proven to be their downfall. King B first entered as King Buxton in the Second Wars and the Third Wars. They came back with King B3 for the Fourth Wars and had a moderate success, especially in the tag team tournament where they teamed up with 101, and they managed to go on and win that. For Extreme Series 1, up until the Seventh Wars, they were known as King B Powerworks. They had a powerful cutting blade on the back of the robot, similar to Pussycat, but they never really got very far. Don't get me wrong, it's nice to see them back, but I think major improvements need to be done to this robot if they plan on getting any real success in the future. Dan Kia versus Big Nipper. Dan Kia definitely kept the pressure on this fight. They were all over Big Nipper, flipping them around, pushing them into Killlot CPZ, where Killlot could do some serious damage to them with his claw. That is, until he got stuck on the arena sidewall. But Big Nipper managed to come back toward the end of the fight and got a few good hits on Dan Kia with their disc, but it ended up going to the judges, which fairly went in favour of Dan Kia because they showed them more aggression and the more control throughout the fight. So now we've reached the final, Dan Kia versus TR2. Both of these are very experienced robots and very powerful. With Dan Kia, it's taken machines like Razor and Gravity to beat them in the past. So very tough robot. TR2, it's never been seen on TV before, even in the classic series, but it has had great success in the live events. It's won 2 UK championships, I believe, so they are a force to be reckoned with. Much like the battle with Big Nipper, TR2 kept the pressure on here. They were certainly on top whenever fighting Dan Kia. They were flipping them around. Dan Kia's flipper seemed to be very ineffective. Great for self-riding, not so great for attacking. TR2 managed to get them into Matilda's CPZ, where a few hits from Matilda's awesome spinning disc managed to do some serious damage to Dan Kia's inner workings, and especially the CO2 system that powers the flipper. So whenever TR2 flipped them over, Dan Kia couldn't do anything, they were counted out, and TR2 were worthy winners and go through to the grand final. Overall, I loved this episode. It really reminded me of the classic series. There's some great entertaining fights, and also we saw the return of a lot of old favourites. But that's just my opinion. I'm a blundering idiot, what do I know? Let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments below, and tell me who are you looking forward to see next time. Thank you so much as always for watching this review. If you liked it, please hit subscribe for more videos, and keep up to date with all my latest news and reviews by liking my Facebook page and following me on Twitter. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.